Every summer, the same thing happens. The beds appear, the fish appear, but the big ones never quite come to the hook. A generation ago, old bank fishermen did not blame luck for this. They were not reading the bed, they were reading the behavior behind it. The largest female bluegill do not wait on the bed. They hold outside the colony, in the edgewater, positioned quietly just beyond the visible sign. The angler who knew that position never had to fish the bed at all. That knowledge has been nearly gone since the 1910s.
It looks like it should work. The beds are right there. The fish are aggressive, guarding their nests, responding to anything that drops near them. A worm under a bobber gets hit almost immediately. But pull the fish in and look at it. It is a male, small, bright-colored, full of energy. You drop the bait back in. Another male, then another. The big females that you saw from the bank, the ones that seemed to be circling the colony, they never quite commit. They stay just outside. They move in for a moment and then drift back. An angler who has never thought about why will assume the big fish are not biting today. But that is not what is happening. The big fish are not on the bed. They were never on the bed.
Before spinning reels, before depth finders, before any of the gear that modern anglers take for granted, the men who fished farm ponds and river backwaters in the early decades of the 20th century fished with simple equipment and careful eyes. A cane pole, light line, a small hook, and time. Enough time to sit on a bank and watch a body of water long enough to understand what was happening beneath the surface. These were not tournament anglers chasing numbers. They were men who fished to eat, who kept notes on what worked and what did not, and who developed an understanding of bluegill behavior that was passed down through practice rather than publication. Most of that knowledge has not survived in any written form, but the behavior of the fish has not changed. Here is what those old bank fishermen observed. Every bluegill colony has two zones. The first zone is the visible one, the cluster of fanned-out beds in the shallows, packed tight, male fish hovering over each one. The second zone is invisible from above. It lies just outside the colony's edge, in slightly deeper water, in the transitional space between the spawning grounds and the open lake. This outer zone is where the female bluegill stage. They do not crowd onto the beds. They hold back, moving in briefly and then retreating. A large female may circle the same area for hours before committing to any single nest. And the largest females may stage in that outer zone for days before the peak of the spawn brings them all the way in.
To understand why females behave this way,
It helps to understand what the male bluegill is actually doing on that bed. He is not waiting for food. He is guarding territory. A male fans out his nest before the females arrive, then defends it aggressively against other males and against predators. When a female approaches, he shifts from aggression to courtship, circling her, nudging her, making a clicking sound that draws her toward the center of the nest. But the female controls the timing. She decides when she is ready. And until that moment arrives, she does not commit. She stages outside. She waits. And the angler who drops bait into the center of the bed is interacting with the male, not the female. This is where most anglers are already fishing the wrong water. The bed is easy to see. It is the obvious target. It produces immediate strikes because the male is aggressive and territorial. But the female, the fish that can weigh 2 or 3 times what a typical male weighs, is not there. She is 10 feet away, sometimes 15, in water that is slightly deeper, slightly cooler, with a little more cover nearby. She is not hiding. She is simply not on the bed yet. And if an angler presents bait at the edge of the colony rather than the center, in that transitional water where the females are holding, the character of the fish that responds changes entirely. The strikes slow down, but the fish get bigger.
Old bank fishermen describe this edge as the place where the water changes character.
At the bed colony, the bottom is swept clean by the fanning of hundreds of tails. The water is stirred near the bottom, and the fish are packed tight. Move 10 to 15 feet toward open water, and the bottom changes. A little softer, a little darker, with more natural cover. Weeds beginning to grow back in. A submerged branch or two. The water is slightly deeper, maybe 4 feet where the beds were 2. This is the staging zone. Old-timers did not have a scientific name for it. They called it the edge, or the drop, or simply the outside. And they understood that the largest fish in any colony would be found there before the spawn reached its peak. The timing mattered as much as the location. A bluegill colony does not reach full activity instantly. It builds over several days. In the early stages, when water temperature first crosses the threshold that triggers bed fanning, the males move in and prepare their nests. The females are nearby, but have not committed. This early window, roughly 3 to 5 days before the colony reaches peak activity, is when the staging behavior is most pronounced and when the largest females are most catchable. They are present, they are active, they are responding to bait, but they are in the edge water, not the bed water. Once the spawn reaches full intensity, the females move onto the nests and the edge empties out. How did old bank fishermen know which stage the colony was in? They watched before they cast. A man with a cane pole and patience could read a bluegill colony from 30 feet away by observing the fish at its outer edge. If the outer fish were moving slowly, circling, holding position, the colony was in early stages. The females were staging. The edge was worth fishing. If the outer fish were gone and the beds were packed tight with constant movement, the spawn was at or past peak. The staging window had closed. The big females had committed. This reading took 5 minutes. It required no equipment. It required the habit of watching before acting, which is a habit that most modern anglers never develop. The presentation used in the edge zone was different from what worked on the bed itself. On the bed, a bait dropped anywhere near a male produced a strike within seconds. The male's aggression did all the work. In the staging zone, the female's behavior was more deliberate. She was not defending territory. She was evaluating. A bait presented too aggressively, dropped too hard, moved too fast, would cause her to drift back. The old bank fishermen who fished this zone used a quiet presentation. A small worm or cricket lowered slowly to the bottom with minimal splash, then left completely still. No movement, no retrieval. The female would approach, inspect, and take the bait on her own terms. Patience was not optional. It was the method. The cane pole was particularly well suited to this kind of fishing. It allowed an angler to lower bait precisely into the edge zone without casting. No splash, no line slapping the water, no disturbance to the staging fish. The angler stood or sat well back from the bank, extended the pole to the edge position, and lowered the bait slowly. If the female flushed, the angler waited. If she held position, the angler waited longer. The strike, when it came, was not the sharp, aggressive hit of a male on a nest. It was a slow, deliberate pull, the kind of take that a distracted angler misses entirely. Old bank fishermen learned to watch the line where it entered the water, not the bobber. A large female barely moves the surface. She simply takes and turns. There is a reason this method stopped being taught after the mid-20th century, and it is not that it stopped working. As spinning reels became standard, the quiet drop presentation of the cane pole was gradually replaced by cast and retrieve approaches. Casting into a visible bed of fish is satisfying and immediately productive. It generates strikes fast. It works for numbers. And for most anglers fishing for a meal or fast action, it is entirely adequate. The edge method produces fewer fish, but larger ones. It requires stillness and observation rather than casting and retrieving. In an era when fishing increasingly rewarded active techniques and visible results, the patient edge presentation became simply inconvenient to teach. The knowledge did not disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because the context that made it natural, a man on a bank with a cane pole and time to watch, became less common. Tackle changed. Fishing pressure changed. The pace of an outing changed. And as those things changed, the observational habits that old bank fishermen developed across seasons of watching the same ponds quietly slipped away. What remained was the part of bluegill fishing that was easy to teach. Find the bed, drop your bait, catch fish. The harder part, read the colony's stage, find the edge, present slowly, required watching before casting. And watching is something that has to be learned by doing, not by reading. For the angler who wants to apply this today, the starting point is the same as it always was. Find a bluegill colony in the early stages of the spawn. In most of the American South and Midwest, that means water temperatures in the mid to upper 60s, warmer than the threshold that triggers bed fanning, but not yet at the peak that brings every female onto the nests. At this stage, the colony is visible, but not at full intensity. The beds are there. The males are on them, fanning and guarding. And in the water just beyond the colony's outer edge, 10 to 15 feet from the nearest nest, the largest females in the population are staging and waiting. That is where the fishing starts. That is where it always started for the men who understood this. The edge position can be read from the bank before a single cast is made. Stand back from the water. Let the surface settle. Watch the outer ring of the colony for fish that are holding position without actively spawning. Fish that are present but not committed. A large female bluegill at rest moves slowly, holds deeper, and does not fan or circle aggressively. If you can clearly see her, you are already too close. Position yourself to present into the edge zone from a distance that does not disturb the staging fish before your bait reaches them. This is the first discipline of the method: observe before presenting. A cane pole allowed the old bank fisherman to do this naturally. He never had to cast into the zone at all. The bait choice matters less than the presentation. Old bank fishermen used whatever was on hand: a red worm, a cricket, a small grub. The Desh female is not selective about what she eats. She is selective about how it arrives. Lower the bait slowly and let it settle to the bottom without disturbance. Do not move it. Do not jig it. Do not retrieve it. If she is in the staging zone, she will find it on her own time. If she does not take within several minutes, lift slowly and relocate 2 or 3 feet along the edge. The staging zone is not a single point. It runs around the full outer perimeter of the colony. Work along it, quietly, with patience, and the largest fish in the colony will begin to show themselves. Most anglers who try this for the first time will be tempted to move to the beds after the first few minutes without a strike at the edge. The beds are right there. They are producing. The edge feels empty by comparison. This impatience is exactly the habit that old bank fishermen had learned to override. The edge does not produce at the same rate as the bed. It produces at a different rate, with different fish. A single morning spent patiently working the outer zone of a colony in early stage spawn will often produce fewer fish than the angler who fishes the beds, but the fish it produces will consistently be the largest animals in that entire colony. That difference is the difference between fishing the visible sign and fishing the cause behind it. The bluegill bed is one of the most readable signs in freshwater fishing. It is visible, predictable, and reliable. But what it shows you is not the whole picture. It shows you the male fish, the nest, the territory. What it does not show you is where the largest fish in the colony are holding before the peak arrives. Old bank fishermen in the early 20th century learned to read past the visible sign to the behavior behind it. They fished the edge because they understood what the edge meant. That knowledge is not lost. The fish still behave the same way every June. The edge is still there. The staging females are still there. Subscribe to Traditional Angling, the behavior behind the visible sign, explained by the men who learned to read it first.